Thank you very much. I have half an hour. This is designed to be very, very interactive. And for those of you that are wondering why they feel the need to have some lollies this morning, maybe it's subliminal messaging around gummy bears or something like that. I don't know how that could have happened. But what we're talking about today is effectively a social media think tank. And what I'd like to do is very quickly take you through just introduction, definition, research, and next steps. So for us, it was very, very clear at the end of the sessions that we actually ran is that what is the definition of social learning? There's a lot of definition around social media and use of social media, but the definition of how you describe social learning. There was also debate about whether the two should be, is it using social media to learn or is it basically social learning? So there was a little consternation around that. And so one slide about us is one of our defined aims was to increase e-learning adoption and development by at least 50% over the next 3 years. So as an association, our job is to support the producers, the suppliers, and consumers of e-learning in Victoria. So can we do that through the advent of social media? Can we support that? So that's our headline vision as an association. And we represent both the producers, the suppliers, and the consumers, which makes us unique in that space. And what makes us even more unique, I think, is that we've kind of bitten off quite a few market segments. So K-12, TAFE, RTO, university, corporate government, and the other category, which we deemed lifelong learning, I think was the appropriate term, which effectively is everyone else in that area. So everything we talk about today is based around these particular market segments. And the research we did was then targeting the needs of K-12, with TAFE, university, and corporate, and come back and see what their particular needs are in this segment. So, thank you very much. We'll try to keep this short and punchy. As a definition in its simplest form, we basically, it was mooted to us that, well, really most of what we're doing in learning is social anyway, and using the 70-20-10 rule of formal versus informal learning. So from a social media perspective, social or informal learning, if you draw that bow, we're doing 70% of what we're doing is informal/social in the learning capacity anyway. And the definition that was relatively accepted, I don't think it was 100% accepted, it was in its simplest form, learning through the assistance of social media and tools. That was, I think we got into pedagogies and other bits and pieces, and there was a bit of debate. At its simplest form, for the term of social learning, that's how we've used and applied that term. So if you disagree with it, happy for you to disagree, but I'm just saying from a research perspective, that's the way we used the term. Cool, so what we did, there was an online survey that went out to our members. We facilitated some face-to-face industry session, both with industry, our membership base, and outside of that. We then had a weighted needs discussion where they said, okay, here are all the things you want to know, that's great, or what you want addressed, but what's the most important, and what is our ability to actually influence those needs? So it's great, for example, quite a few people said, oh, I do work in the publishing industry, and they said, oh, we hate digital publishing. Well, okay, your need is you want to get rid of the digital, but your ability to do that is probably very, very limited. So I understand you might not want it, but it's here, so your ability to change it might be different. So, and then we basically had a compiled startup white paper. So for those of you that haven't had a copy of this, I'm not sure if you have or have not, can we let Glennis or myself know, and we'll make sure that you actually get a copy that has some of the results that are compiled, and that's part of the benefits of being a member, that you get access to that information. So most of what I'm talking about today is referenced in here as well. And obviously, what do we do next? So what did the stakeholders actually say? So if we start with the K-12, it was very much about what is the evidence that social media actually provides any tangible learning benefit at all. So tell me now, show me the evidence that it actually provides. So this is, at a high level, the data that was coming back from our K-12 respondents was, what is the evidence? Okay. Number two was, there are many large organizational platform companies coming into this space, and they're having social media options with those platforms. So I think this is also a little bit Victorian. At that stage, there were a few large system vendors that were coming in. And when you're talking about representing independent schools, if I use, for example, the explanation in corporates, when corporates adopted social media, they said one of their most important things was to make sure that it's identifiable who's making comments about whom and about what. So if you're in a working life, you have a badge with your an ID badge. So in an online environment that's provided either informally or informally by the organization, that's the same. As soon as you provide a photo and the real ID of somebody, 95% of their problems relating to sledging or inappropriate behavior disappear because they can be identified. But as soon as you give them some sort of anonymity, because it's the same reason why when you drive in a car you might cut someone off and you don't really, if you don't know who they are, that's okay. But if you get out of the car and it turns out to be your neighbor, you suddenly go, oh, how are you going? So you might have been angry, but as soon as you knew someone you knew, oh, you back off. So it's that whole thing of anonymity. So from a social media perspective, also in a corporate life, public comments about a private organization are deemed part and enforceable by the organization's policy. So even if you're making public comments on a network the organization doesn't own about that organization, that's still part of the code of conduct. So some of the biggest issues around schools that we deal with are, what should our code of conduct be around use of social media, right? And literally get the parents to sign off on it, get the staff to sign off on this. So if you're talking about us in a public domain and we're identifiable and through your commentary, that's part of our code of conduct. Not maybe legally enforceable, but part of our code of conduct. Right? So anyway, large organizations, there is the move of large platform companies coming in. Large organizations also is the large publishing organizations are moving relatively heavily. So the large publishers generally can contact schools directly with information, generally have a direct relationship, generally have representatives that come to school in a face-to-face world. What do you actually do then in an online world? How do they basically mirror that in an online world? So you can see some of the concerns have really nothing to do with social media, but these are the concerns that are being tied in with social media to try to solve. Congruently, they see K-12, social media as a great way, or social learning as a great way that the small can distribute as if they were bigger. So that you can get a teacher to publish materials to take on the larger publishers. So that you can be able to actually do that. You can begin to get the information out of an organization and act a lot larger than you actually are. Major issue around social learning was support for the teachers and groups. That's what they came back to us and said, we want to use social media to support ourselves. We want to use social bookmarking where teachers say, oh, I found this resource, and then be able to spread that information around like-minded teachers. So teachers were more interested in supporting each other than they were necessarily in supporting the students, based on the survey results that we've actually done. That's not to say that they don't want to do that, they're just saying that they see it as a gap, that how can teachers use this to support themselves, to support the students, not just supporting the students. Also, as internal versus external. So again, how can we use this as a group of people to talk about a topic we're interested in, as opposed to basically dealing perhaps with a parent or another public or somebody else? So internal versus external sector. So in the TAFE RTO sector was contestability for students and funding. So I think in the K-12 it was, we don't have enough funding, we're not necessarily contesting for it, but in the RTO TAFE sector and a little bit in the unis, it's now becoming contestable funding. So how are we going to use some sort of social learning to basically attract and keep students within our organization? These are our big things at the moment, because our very core of how we get paid is changing. It's fundamentally changing. And my understanding is that the funding now follows the student, not necessarily the organization. So you've got to pitch and keep the student in a very rich way. Overseas markets. So we're seeing the market for overseas students. Again, there is a fairly hefty analysis that we believed in Australia that we were the education market of choice for international students because of the quality of our education. While that's certainly important, when you change things like visa classifications and other bits and pieces, you'll find that the international student market, I think, has dropped by about at least 15 to 20% because of the change in the visa classification. So people generally come to Australia and study in Australia not because of just the quality of the education, but because of the other factors around it, the lifestyle factors. And it's the lifestyle factors that are actually one of the largest drivers of that market. So how can I use social learning to basically drive an overseas market? The flip side to that is, if we have a course that's completely online, do students want to come to Australia 100% online but never set foot in Australia? cannibals at the top and the bottom. So they were seeing that their certificate courses were basically being taken by low-end providers, and their diploma courses are being taken over by the university sector. So you've got this top and bottom. That's what I'm calling it, being cannibalized. So where does the TAFE and RTO sector fit in? And then now you have the change in the funding requirements, particularly in Victoria. So they're just seeing at the top and bottom. So ostensibly, they feel like they're being attacked. How can I use some sort of social learning to drive a differentiation in this marketplace? Right? Don't have the infrastructure to support it, which is interesting. And again, what are the tangible outcomes of me adopting some sort of social learning? What I find really interesting is we have a survey about social learning, and they come back as their top needs really are around what are the tangible outcomes, and a lot of this other stuff relates to their business, running their sales as businesses. There were no TAFE or RTO providers in the room, were there? Oh, sorry. You're the industry. That's cool. Yeah, and effectively legitimacy. Is it a legitimate way, is a legitimate form of communication? Or is it a legitimate way of actual learning?
On that subject again, my daughter is currently doing a certificate course online. It's essentially a bunch of PDFs downloaded, she has to read through, and then she answers some questions.
Yep.
They've made a token gesture to social media by referring her to blogs where the other students can contribute, and she's asked, part of her evaluation process is for her to contribute to the discussion online. She goes onto the blog, she dumps her ideas, that's done, and then she moves back to and I look over her shoulder and I say, at least look at what the other students have done. Oh, it's a waste of time. That's an interesting observation, but again, trying to harness the anarchy of social media.
It's a matter of whether your education. Are you doing it because you just want to pass, to tick the box to get to what you need to do to get the requirements, or are you doing it because you actually really want to learn? Like, for example, at uni, I actually went back to uni and attended a bunch of lectures that I wasn't enrolled in. I actually found I had much more fun going to lectures that had nothing to do with what I was actually enrolled in. And then my stuff that I was enrolled in completely suffered. Right. The business equivalent of that is that 98% of people who start a business not because they're interested in the business, but because they're interested in a topic. So they're typically atrocious business people, but they love aquariums, or they love video, so they start a video production company or something like that. So the saying is they generally corral around their topic of interest, not necessarily the fact of them being in business, or not the fact that they're in education. It's generally around their interest. So from a social media perspective, do you fight that? Probably not. Which means that you might, as an RTO, you might have to hang out in places that you don't traditionally hang out in to get the response you want as far as groups of people. So okay, what are university stakeholders said? Viability in a student interaction. So most organizations, their use of what they call social learning would be to make a video, publish it, put it up, and it's more electronic distribution than actual learning per se. It's an efficient way of distributing. So what they want to know is, if I have to create a learning course and then talk to people about it via social media, creating the course is expensive, but talking about it and marketing it is relatively cheap. So what is the most viable way to have a student interaction? So you'll see now universities' TAFEs will almost always advertise their Facebook page first for coming to universities and organizations. If you're interested in something, see us on Facebook, because that's how that target market is communicating. Not because that's how the university wants to communicate, but that's where their target market is sitting. They don't have email addresses. They don't generally, read their email. It's for old. What is that? Emails for old people. I don't really want to know what the definition of old is in this scenario, but information. Where does information end and learning begin? One of these constant debates that comes up: is this information? Is this actual marketing material, or is this actually learning? And if you see what's happening now, even in our newspapers today, I mean, what you're seeing in journal, the model of paying for deep research and deep insight is no longer viable. People don't want it. They're happy to have the news grab and move on. Generally speaking, so where does information end and when does learning begin? So again, this is what the university sector was worried about. Protection of IP, it's very interesting. I guess the younger of us don't generally care about your digital profile and your IP. The older organizations grew up in an organization where I own that IP, I own that material, so it's mine, I want to be paid for it every time it's actually distributed. Almost, my experience is to the detriment of actually getting the information out. They'd rather see it in a room not used than be used publicly inappropriately and some sort of get paid for it. Cool. Corporations, we block it. We stop it. We don't like it. We control it. It really is a deer in the headlights topic. I've never, in 15 years, never experienced something where you run for the hills or no, I don't do that. Simon doesn't do it. You were on it straight. You're tweeting people right now. That's why you're at opposite ends of the room. No, we block it. So that's cool.
What do you say about Simon on
He doesn't know. So the technology doesn't officially support it. What few realized, say, in NAB was their first parlance into social media for learning was that someone said, I'm sick of dealing with the internal networks, I'll just go set up a site outside of the organization. And then that's when they had to acknowledge that social media from a learning perspective has to be used. So the learning team set up a site outside of the organization because they weren't allowed to set it up internally. So they went off and basically did that. And then officially said, oh, we better control it, so at least let them build it in our backyard so that we can control it. And go. So what we haven't really discussed as much here, but it was certainly that mobile is the prevalent device. What we are seeing from an e-learning development perspective is that if you're talking social, you cannot take the mobile out of the equation. It is the prevalent connected device. And we're now seeing development of content bypassing the traditional that and going straight to mobile. So they're built for mobile from day one, and then they're basically being retrofitted to the desktop, particularly in things like large corporate inductions where you're places like your large supermarket chains or whatever, where your workforce is either very young and first job, and they walk in the door and say, where's my app? Literally, that's what they expect. Where's my app for how to work here? Or the return to workers, which are the older ones that are coming back into the workforce that are saying, where's my workbook or whatever. So it is a bit of a, yeah, where's my manual? Exactly. Yeah. Cool. Yep. We're now government. Tracking and reporting. If I can't track it, I can't see it as being done, I'm not interested. Happens in corporates as well, but it wasn't in government. Generally it was, how does this relate to my competency framework? How does this relate to the competencies I need to achieve? Some of that comes again in corporate, but government, it was quite prevalent. It's a waste of time outside of comms. Not saying that they were, I'm pointing at you because you're government, Richard. It was seen as a waste of time outside of comms. So from a learning perspective, we don't see how we can use this. We block it internally anyway. How are we going to use it from a learning perspective? Have absolutely no idea. Again, the concept of formal versus informal. Formal is very highly pushed in a government environment, but we see that we can use it for informal, but we don't really have any informal frameworks here. Is this going to replace my face-to-face? Is this going to replace my ability to go to a conference twice a year or any of that sort of stuff? Is this going to replace it or whatever? 80% of the market for e-learning in Australia is still compliance driven. So if I can get that compliance thing driven down as quickly as I can through effective distribution, then I'll basically do it that way. So can my social learning drive that cost down even more? Absolutely fantastic. So you're getting the generational, as you say, the generational learners are like people that are on their third generation of learning, gone from workbooks to maybe online assessments to, well, with CD-ROMs, then online assessments, and then now, okay, so now I've got an e-learning module. How can I then dissect that even more into learning objects through using social media or social learning? I would agree. Now, lifelong learners was our other category, as I said, so there's really no rhyme or reason to the stuff that actually comes up in this category, but basically inertia. I will do it if something forces me to do it. For example, why did farmers adopt the internet? To get grain prices and rainfall prices and all that sort of stuff. So whatever it is that drives me, I need to communicate with my grandkids, that's where they hang out, fine. There'll be some sort of inertia that will drive me. Comms is education/edutainment. Someone from Korea, we were talking earlier, is they see a lot of e-learning in Korea comes across as what they call edutainment. So it's comms. and where does comms start and education begin? Again, same issue as before. So when we came together, these were the things that people said they were interested in. I know I should normally build this up and talk about each one, but effectively, you can read this in regards to what were the major issues, and they highlighted their importance. Right? So the main ones are seen, they see it crucial. So the markets see that skilling the educators and risk management around social learning are absolutely crucial things to identify. And the other crucial one was how to evaluate the benefits of and assessing competencies derived through social learning. So how do we know it's going to do anything for learning? How do we make sure that the educators or the professional educators in here understand and how to use this? And what are the things that can go wrong if we do it wrong are deemed as the crucial things that the industry said that they wanted addressed. Okay? But what's our ability to actually address that? How can we address the benefits and derived through social learning? Is it easy to address? It's actually quite difficult. Skilling the educators. Is it easy to teach a teacher? What can we do? So the aim out of this is what we'd love to do is to communicate with you and say, right, the three things were identifying the benefits, acknowledge the pitfalls, analyze the results around social learning. So how can we as an association, through you, back into your own organizations, identify the benefits and acknowledge the pitfalls? How can we do case studies? So if you're an ASIC and you're dealing with schools, are there any case studies that we can use with you and publish out to the wider group with ASIC's permission and with the eLearning.org's permission around, hey, here's how we've used social learning in our organization, here's how we've used it in engaging in schools, here's how a government department has engaged, and how can we give that kudos then back to ASIC for doing that, and then basically publishing it for the benefit of other people. That's cool. So and the last slide was risk manage the use of social learning. I don't necessarily want to concentrate necessarily on the negative, but to be able to say, just be aware that these things, there always is the dark side to the force, obviously, and it's usually the dark side that you're going to hear about. You'll never hear about the thousands of people that have met great contacts online for particular projects. You're only going to hear about the one or two that haven't actually worked out. So that was basically it, and I've gone over time slightly, I think, or we started a bit later. Was there anything else?
But no, look, it's an evolving area, and I wouldn't suggest that any of us have the answers, so that's a watch with interest, but certainly one we all need to be on top of. So thank you very much to Mark, if we can give him a little round of applause.
Thank you.
So some quick housekeeping.